Oh, I just pressed got it. I can't find my cursor. Hang on. This is the problem, is because it's I accidentally pressed the black screen, but I can't see. Oh, got it. There we go.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, introducing everyone to Dr. Mick Collins, who is, I'm very, very happy that Mick is able to talk with us today because, well, for many reasons, but Mick is the author of this book, which is one of my favorite books, The Restorative Spirit. It fits so perfectly with the hawthorn tree, which is our tree for this month of June. The Restorative Spirit, it covers so many beautiful different things, but the theme of forgiveness is at the heart, I think, of the book, really. I'll say a little bit about Mick, and then I'll hand over to Mick to tell us all a bit of his story. And then we'll talk a bit more about forgiveness as a theme. So Mick is a transpersonal occupational therapist, and he focuses on something called Eco Mysticism. And his journey, I'll let him say more about his journey, but briefly has taken him from the army to a Buddhist monastery to training as an occupational therapist and studying transpersonal psychotherapy and being the author of these books. And it's been a very rich and amazing journey. So Mick, thank you for being with us. And yeah, can you tell us anything else that you'd like to say about yourself or your journey and your journey to write, your journey from where you started to here?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'll praise it really quickly, and I'll make the emphasis on forgiveness because that's the subject. But yeah, thanks, Ros. Thanks for the invite. And it's really lovely to meet you. We've had some correspondence online, but it's really lovely to chat, and I'm sure we could just chat forever. We've had a nice little conversation today. Yeah, so where do I begin with linking my story to forgiveness? I will make this short, but it's about uncovering our own story to wholeness, I believe. And in my case, when I was a baby, I was adopted, but there was a couple of things that happened in that process which we've now looked back on as being quite traumatic. So I grew up with a sort of always some sort of never feeling like I connected to anything and dissociated, really. And we moved a lot. We were always moving around because my father had a job and we had to keep moving around. So I never had any stable friends and didn't have any extended family because both my adopted parents were adopted. And it's just like, it was almost like this weird existence. And I felt like I didn't belong to anything. And so there was a real cut-offness. And I do believe that child trauma was underneath it all because that sort of came out later. But as a teenager, I went off the rails in a fairly spectacular way. And I was about 4 times in front of the judge and getting some pretty heavy duty sort of situations in my life, getting involved in things that were really not very good, which I look back on and I don't feel very happy about what I did. Not only the things I got caught for, but the things I didn't get caught for. And, you know, it's quite makes you think about the impact that I will have had on people's lives. Hence, you can see where we're going with the forgiveness. But I made some rudimentary attempts to try and reconcile myself to something to be a better person. And one of them was at the last court appearance I had for brandishing a carving knife at a football match, because I was into that type of gang related stuff. And I told the judge I wanted to join the army to make a fresh start. And they said they would honor that. They couldn't make that happen, but they would honor it. And I got a heavy fine. This is 1973. Gosh, that's a long time ago now. I got a heavy fine, and they just trusted that I would do it. And the military didn't want to take me because they thought trouble. But I got in and I started to clean things up and started to galvanize a sense of self and, you know, a sense of worth and respect and things like that. Left the army, traveled for 6 years, became a hippie type character, you know, long hair and beard and all that, and bombing off to India in the 70s and having a good time. And then I ended up after 6 years in a Buddhist monastery for 3 years. And then I started to have a different relationship to the inner. And I had a spiritual crisis, which had to happen, to be quite frank, because I was carrying so much that was unexpressed and unresolved. It came up spectacularly. We were doing Kundalini practice and I was opening channels, and all of a sudden I had this most wonderful mystical awakening, and then this incredible descent into something horrific, which was all of the unprocessed things that I hadn't looked at. So I met murderousness, I met all sorts of horror. And then I got myself through that, and I didn't get sectioned, which was quite an amazing thing. I got through that, and because I met a great psychologist who believed in me and said, I think you're going through a transformational crisis. But there's an important point here, because I then trained to become a therapist. I'd left school at 15, I had no education, went to college, got some A levels, and then went to university, became a therapist, then worked in mental health, and then started doing some psychotherapy training, and then finding out, oh my Lord, the story that was coming up. And onwards, building something that was more integrated with the depth of the unconscious revelations that I'd seen in myself, trying to find a way to integrate self and with a small s and a self with a big S, the transpersonal self. That became a long journey, and then became an academic, writing peer-reviewed papers, book chapters, and I started writing a PhD, got that. But there was something critical that happened in the writing of the books that you kindly showed, Ros. There's 3 of them. This is the 3rd one. The first book was a sort of a touching into the journey, and the second book started to open up much more to what a retrospective. What does that mean in my life journey? And what does it mean going forward? So the 3 books took 12 years to write, but they are sort of a reflective piece of what's been and what's going forward, looking at it in a wider universal global context, so global crisis. And it wasn't until I started writing the 3rd book, The Restorative Spirit, that I had a complete meltdown. I read the works of Allan Kardec, 5 volumes, and they're about 400 or 500 pages each, and I just couldn't put them down. They're like spirits that are then giving messages to mediums about what we need to do to cultivate ourselves. And in there was the concept of atonement, which I'd read before with Marianne Williamson, but it really hit home with this work that I was reading of Allan Kardec. So I did a big retrospective of every horrible thing I'd ever done to anyone since I could remember. And trust me, it was an impressive list. And it went on. And I remember just punching another boy in the face in the playground as a kid for no reason. And I felt grief at this. And it went on, and all the things I'd done, criminal stuff, and I'd been done for, but all other little things where I'd treated partners in the past, or, you know, there was some real shadowy things that I hadn't fully reconciled to. So I then decided that part of my atonement would be to consider self-forgiveness. That I'm not saying I'm a victim to someone else. Yes, I was hurt by other people, but my focus was, what a shit I've been. Look at all the things I've done that are bad. So I went on a big path of self-forgiveness and trying to reconcile that. And that's what I've been doing since, really. But in a nutshell, then, I also recognized the need for forgiving others that had done things to me that I then allowed myself to feel. And I thought, oh, yeah, that wasn't so nice. And I found it easier to forgive others than I did myself, oddly enough, which is weird. I was so hard on myself. So that inner critic, that superego, was still present, even though I'd worked on it in my therapy for years. Here it was again. So I kind of tidied up my relationship to inner and outer through forgiveness, but also I then went to a divine element as well and thought, you know, actually, I'm sorry. I don't know quite. I was looking down at trees and, you know, I'm sorry for this. And it opened up a path for me to try and bring more of that understanding into life. It's still a work in progress. I'm not managing it, still flawed, still a broken human being at some level, but still reaching across to that quality of forgiveness that I think is so important. So in a nutshell, that's what's brought me to here in terms of forgiveness.
Mm.
And yeah, and I really thank you for this opportunity, Ros, because I think it's such an important subject.
Oh, me too. Thank you for telling us that amazing story. It's like just listening to you. It's so kind of soothing and relaxing and inspiring to know that we all do shitty things, and we all do. Even like when I read your book, and I didn't know you at all. I didn't know anything about you. I read a little bit about your story kind of in the front of it, but really when I kind of, you read a book like that and you kind of imagine that the author is this like absolutely highly evolved person that's never done anything wrong, that is like just like, has this kind of like moral authority, and think, oh, and whereas me with all of my stuff that I've done and keep doing, and
Yeah.
But it's so nice when to hear that, where that it was an ongoing process for you, not just all the things that happened in your earlier life, but that actually this process of kind of atoning and writing that list is something that's happened so recently.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, all those years on and all that training and all that writing and reflection, and here we are. And yet I don't feel so possessed by it or twisted by it or warped by it, because it's that self-forgiveness, I think, is so key. And I'm glad I did that first, because obviously my list was so overwhelmingly bad. I just thought I got to start there. There's nowhere else to go. I can't say, oh, you did this to me.
Yeah,
they did, but God, look what I've done. Wow. I mean, I've hurt a lot of people in that respect, and I don't feel proud of that. I don't feel comfortable speaking about it. But by God, if I don't, then I'm deluding myself. I think that's the thing. And so I think one of the things that I've got excited about forgiveness is, there was this lovely Oxford and Yale study saying that I don't like the word hardwired, because I don't think we have wires in us, but that's the word they use, but we're predisposed to develop forgiveness. So I think this is a evolutionary edge to really pick this up, but not only for us and other humans, but for animals and for the planet. And this is a big piece of work. And I think it's a really fresh piece of work, because it invites us to reflect, and then to be very human with each other, rather than being the sort of glittery poster boy or girl for something, And so one of the questions I have is, imagine a world without forgiveness. What would that be like? It would be weird beyond belief. There would just be some sort of, wanting revenge or something like that. Forgiveness is so powerful.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And can I ask, this might be, and you don't have to answer this, but like, I'm interested in your kind of atonement process, and how much of it was actually contacting people and saying, I want to say I'm sorry for something and ask you to forgive me, and how much of it was just inside you kind of forgave yourself? Did you do both?
Yeah, I did a bit of the other, the contacting people, but my past has been so dispersed. I'm not in touch with a lot of people that I hurt, but I would, if they were down the road, I'd go up and I'd say, I'm sorry, I've hurt you. I know I have. I know I did something which was, on one level bordering on unforgivable, but perhaps, we could talk or something, and then hear their side and allow some space for that to happen. I mean, it's it's a big thing to do, isn't it? I mean, I do it in my family. I remember saying to my daughter once, I said, I'm really sorry if I've really upset or hurt you in any way that I'm not aware of. And, we had a lovely little conversation about that, but it's about being vulnerable enough to extend that invitation. I do it with my wife. We have those kinds of conversations and reach into some difficult things. I would do it with people that I've hurt as well, if I knew where they were. And it's not easy though, is it?
Not easy, because you have to kind of risk rejection, and you have to risk kind of like, because our metaphor is around the hawthorn tree and about kind of the spikes of hawthorn in winter, kind of keeping us in that kind of prison, and then blossoming the thorn, letting the blooms of forgiveness kind of be bigger than the thorns.
Yes.
But I think sometimes when we kind of open up to address somebody that we have hurt, there is the potential that we get a kind of spike in our own heart, you know, and that can be so painful to say, actually, yeah, I don't forgive you, and you did this and you did that, and it did this on me and that on me, like the consequences, like, so we have to risk that.
Yeah, and the life review research of near-death experiences really underlines that, actually, because you can think, I don't want to do that, I don't want that conversation. But actually, when you have a life review, when people who've had near-death experiences, they actually get a sort of panoramic felt experience of the consequences of how they interacted with others. So I think this is good preparation, even if you haven't done it, if you haven't made that conversation with someone, imagine it. And then you're in a field where that loosens something up in the collective anyway. So absolutely. I believe.
Yeah. And then even if you kind of knock on that door, or, you know, open-heartedly say that thing, and even if the response you get is a slam in the face, at least you tried, and then maybe your own conscience can be clearer, because you know that you went in with an open heart, and that
you tried.
You can't respond how someone else responds, but you can't control how someone else responds, but we can control what we do. So
that's very well said, and I agree with that. And I feel that it's a process of having conversations like this that allow things to begin to move, because we know that forgiveness for some people is just a step too far. But again, the idea that we're always victims to someone else's perpetration, well, it helps us have a little look at where we've been perpetrators. Yes, we might have suffered in a way that we've never inflicted on anyone else, and that could be true. But how do we know? I mean, we may have squashed all manner of animal life, and, you know, poured poison down sort of an ant nest. We may have chopped down a whole bunch of trees that birds and all that were nesting in. And, you know, how do we know that we haven't done something really difficult for others? And taking it out of a human-centric context and giving it a little bit more width than that, and depth. And I think then we look at, well, maybe, yes, particularly if somebody's had horrendous abuse, then yeah, I wouldn't say that lightly. But we're not all absolutely clean, and we're not all just either a victim or a perpetrator. We've got a bit of both. Yes, so being open to that, I think, is important.
And I think,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, what was the last? I cut you
off. Well, it just popped in my head. I'm sorry. When I do go, I get quick.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, everyone will love it too. So please.
Well, Jung, when I read the Red Book, and I read that 4 times now, because it became a real sort of like, oh, thank you to some really esteemed psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who's just taken the lid off and showing it all. He said words to the effect that those who know the lowest in themselves are capable of great mercy. And when you read that, you could really interpret that in many, many ways, and some people may or may not like that. What I got from it is I saw how low I'd been in my own behavior, and morally and ethically and all that, but it did allow me to have a sense of mercy towards others, you know, like, I'm really sorry, you know, I'm sorry that person's behaving in that way. I genuinely am. It doesn't mean to say I won't get angry about it, but that's part of the process too. But it does open us up, I think, with self-forgiveness path, and then eventually, if we can, forgiving others.
So yeah, and having that kind of humility, and just like really feeling the discomfort of it, and channeling that into real empathy for the discomfort of others, because when we've done something, we kind of hate ourselves for it. And so when other people have hurt us, they pretty much, there'll be something in them that's really causing them discomfort too. So even just wanting to relieve the suffering of somebody else in some kind of way, like, even if we can't forgive what they did, but
we can't get off it too easy, because our dreams will start to show us what's if we've got a unconscious process going on, and we've got a conscious attitude of feeling like, you know, your moral rectitude is so high that, you know, but actually your unconscious dreams might be showing you all manner of dirt and
Yes.
crap that's coming up, and actually you think, oh, that was just a dirty dream, I don't want that. But no, that's actually showing you that something is alive in you. So there's no, and the other thing is, what, for me anyway, this idea of carrying resentment, which is the opposite of forgiveness, I think, is, yes, things happen to us, but we've done things to others too, other species, the land and all that. But if we carry resentment and it gets projected onto others, then that resentment is eating our own soul. There's no salvation in that. There's no comfort in that, that you are then, you know, you're actually poisoning your own soul with that resentment. So yes, there's a process there. And I'm not saying just snap out of it, because that's not right either. But hang on a minute, let's look at how hurt you were by them, and let's validate that. And let's also think about, you know, that humans are flawed and they make mistakes, and they may have been abused themselves, or, you know, and it creates a capacity for something to change and transform.
A different story about it. There's in Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, I think it is, the most recent one, he talks about, if you kind of trying to find like a source of blame for kind of cycles of abuse, it's very difficult to find, like, to pinpoint like who to blame, because it's almost like you blame the person that hurt you, but they were hurt, and then you blame the person that hurt them, but they were hurt by someone else, and it's like you trace it back to like a kind of amoebic cell, you know, it's like there's no, you can't find the cause. So it's like, I think, and actually one of the things I'm interested to ask you about is, it's clear that we're in a culture where we don't really have the structures around supporting us in processes of transformative justice, restorative justice. So how do we, given that there's a lot of trauma in our culture, we're very fragmented. We live in a culture in the West where the way we live has been dictated or like shaped by kind of corporate interests to a large degree, so that the kind of community aspects of our life have been kind of shriveled up a bit. How can we start to build the structures that we need, so that actually we don't keep passing down the trauma to the next generation, and actually we do heal ourselves slowly with support of others, and then start to heal each other, forgive each other too?
I think, Ros, I think you've asked the question of our future. I think this is our species' future. I noticed as I spoke, I got a wave of tears coming up. Yeah. And I still feel them. I feel the tears, because I feel my own part to play in that. And I don't know, it's not a pull me or a bash myself, but it's a tears of God, some transgenerational inheritance that we're all just buying into and picking up the tab and carrying it on by creating another debt of sorrow. So, and you know, when you know that you've played a part in that, the tears are for saying, oh God, what a great question. How do we get out of this? And it does make me feel emotional when I think of that, because this is the work. This is, I think, the work of the time. And you mentioned restorative justice, and I feel that there's a real gift in that, because somehow restorative justice has created a template for us to interact around some of the things underneath that are really difficult to speak about. My only problem with it is it has a very clear delineation between that event, you victim, me perpetrator, or the other way around, and therefore it's a time encapsulated communication around an event. What I think that could happen in terms of taking that further is to, process that in a restorative way and hearing the impact of the things that you did on the other. But there would be another bit for me where the other could then say, and you know what? I don't want to let you off the hook, because what you did was tough, actually. It was horrible. But actually, I'm now through this process recognizing where I've been a perpetrator, where I've hurt, where I've destroyed, where I've gossiped and maligned someone's reputation and shredded them. But I thought it was okay. And all of a sudden, something shifts in the atmosphere, rather than this binary interaction between the wrongdoer and the that somehow something much more rich can happen, and the field opens up to a not necessarily a free-for-all, but maybe a piece of work where, because restorative justice conferences are facilitated, but where a lot of that could come through. I think that would be the beginning of the next step, that it's not just you that's the perpetrator and me the victim, or whatever way you want to frame it. And then I think there's another part of the dissociation in that is we've lost track of the numinous, that actually interactions at depth that are soul related are potentially like numinous attractors. And I've been in these situations. A spirit will be present, and you feel it, and you think, wow. And in that moment, it's a sacrament, it's a prayer, it's an altar of forgiveness. And some people can drink from that cup, and others might say, I'm glad I was there, but I can't quite get there yet. But they'll be changed by that sacrament. And it is a sacrament, because I think about, I read all spiritual literature, but I think about Peter's question to Jesus. If somebody does that to us, should we forgive them? And he says, we forgive them 7 times 70, meaning always. It's not a one-off event. This is a life path. This is the journey of soul. Oh, what would you call it? Soul awakening, soul progression, that you are then opening up to the numinous that you cannot control. It comes to you and you feel it and you're blessed by it. And then you take that blessing on your life journey onwards. That to me is the sacrament of forgiveness that currently isn't in our social makeup. And in the previous books, I've written a lot about the numinous and a lot about the sacraments of doing an action in that respect. Not doing just to fill the gap because you're bored, doing as a real act of, being whatever it is that opens us up to something magnificent. And I think the numinous is another thing that's been dissociated from our culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful, that idea of the kind of the great kind of grace coming through, and in a way letting ourselves off the hook a bit, because it's like, well, you kind of can't force forgiveness. It has to be something that kind of flows within you, and you can create the conditions and have the conversations, but there will, for it to really shift, it's something that feels like it's kind of coming through you in a kind of cleansing thing, rather than something that you cognitively decide. It's an embodied experience of grace.
Yes. And that grace, a grace is a given. It's not yours, it's not mine, it's not ours. It's actually transcends, it's transpersonal. And if you can really allow ourselves to be touched by that, like I say, we can come to that moment and we may drink from the cup, we may not, but we'll be touched by what happened there. It won't go away. And so it might be a bit longer that somebody gets onto I can forgive now, but yeah. And it takes time. I mean, I'm thinking of Eva Kor, who was written a story. She was experimented on in Auschwitz by Dr. Mengele, her and her twin. I mean, what a terrible thing. They both survived, and they got in touch with other twins that had been through the same experience. They formed a network. Sadly, her sister died of other complications, nothing to do with the experience, or it might have been, but we don't know. But the 50 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, a doctor who had worked alongside Mengele had actually heard of Eva Kor and her work and made contact, and they traveled to Auschwitz together as somebody who had participated in these gruesome experiments and murder, overseeing gas chambers. Anyway, they went together, and she forgave him there and then, and she said it was like a miracle medicine. And then he was enabled to go and then look at, rather than just being consumed with guilt and horror, he was, by being forgiven, he was, I didn't read his account, but I would only imagine that act of forgiveness allowed him to go further with his journey of what he had done. And what a story. Wow. That's in the book, by the way, that one, but she's an amazing woman. Wow. Incredible.
And there's this other story that I'm actually going to ask you to tell us in great detail, because it was one of the ones that I really, I feel like, yeah, it can't be hurried. And it's encouraging for us to know that it can't be hurried and that it takes time. So that was 50 years afterwards. You know, we can give ourselves a long timeline here, you know,
That's
no
right.
pressure.
Yeah.
And
And breathe.
yeah, exactly. Because otherwise it's like, oh God, and it, you know, it makes everything harder when we think we've got to do it in this kind of time frame. But
exactly.
if we can just, you know, allow ourselves time and know that it's cyclical, and that we can start with just forgiving ourselves for something, and then, you know, just slowly continue. But that one of the things that I think can really help me, because, you know, I need to do the list that you've done. I'm gonna do it this June, actually.
Oh, bless you.
June. And yeah, there's a lot there, and it's, you know, it feels kind of frightening, but also strong to be ready to go there. But I think one of the things that's helped me get ready, like ready to be ready rather than like quite ready, is, you know, over the last year or so since I read your book, has been rereading it and reading this story. There's something about reading about someone that's been able to forgive in this incredible way that opens your heart. You feel you almost feel vicariously their power of forgiveness. Like you said about those moments of kind of feeling that the power of it, that other people are affected around you. So I think, you know, even if we can't like perform great miracles of forgiveness in our own lives, we can hear the stories of others and allow that to soften us and let a little bit of blossom, just one or two blossoms, you know, flower over the spikes that we might be holding. So
Beautiful.
if you would tell us the story, it's Mary Johnson and O'Shea Israel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
I think that's correct. Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know how to pronounce his name either, but yeah, O'Shea killed Mary's son and received a prison sentence of 25 years. And that didn't touch Mary at all. There was nothing redemptive about that for her. There was no kind of like, oh, that feels better. She was grieving, and even going to the support groups. I mean, imagine, I mean, they can be very helpful for people, I'm sure. I know groups can be. But for her, it didn't touch her. Something about the process was not getting through at a deeper level for her. And she was obviously very perplexed and disturbed by losing her son. And so what happened was, after 12 years, talk about time frames, after 12 years, O'Shea had served 12 years, she wanted a restorative justice conference. So he agreed to that. And so this is a very particular type of interaction where you get a facilitator. You can have family members, you could have priests, you could have all sorts of people in the mix to be part of that witnessing circle, if you wish. Anyway, she basically sat in the circle, and he was devastated about what he had done, and declared that, and was very upfront about that, and that really touched Mary profoundly. And there was one little incident where she stood up and started to wobble on her feet, unsurprisingly, after meeting the person that had killed her son. But he gently stepped forward and held her, because he thought she was going to stumble.
Oh.
Gets me every time. I'm going to go in a minute. I cry easy. But it really touched me, and I thought he stepped forward. And so you can't plan something like that. You can rehearse something you might want to say to make her feel better, but you can't. There was a moment of bodily, and they had a hug, and I believe it was a hug, or was it in that touch? But she forgave him. She just felt this need to forgive him, but from the soles of her feet. And I like the fact that we got an SOLE, soul, which was really about the soul with an SOUL. But from the soles of her feet, she felt something rise up through her body and go. Now, to me, that's like, I don't know, you can imagine it like an exorcism of some type of things, that something has been exorcised that was formerly, whatever it was, whatever it was doing to her in her relationship to him, it went. Anyway, he eventually got out of prison and then moved next door to Mary. So they lived next door to each other. And now they go around doing talks for churches, groups, all sorts of people like that. And she refers to him as her spiritual son. So there's an altar of transformation. There's an altar, a crucible of transformation, if you wish. And they both drank from that cup. That cup, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? When you think, wow, that's the power of it. And you imagine, and this is where I just want to go that step further. Imagine then if we came to that sacrament, and I don't mind using that word because it is a sacrament, because the numinous comes in, and the numinous is the holy other. This is not something that's, I don't care how many people have followed these people that are just reductionists and saying the spirit doesn't exist. Sorry, for me it does. And that comes in and it impacts us and it opens us up. Well, imagine then if we extended that, and I'm not going to use Mary and O'Shea's names because it's not right to talk about them, but imagine if you had had a similar situation to that, and the person who had been a victim said, this has been quite touching, and I've done things I'm not proud of, and I'm sure in their journey they must have had conversations like that.
Yes.
I don't know, but I just think that's some part of the step forward.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And then it just becomes this kind of legacy. And there's something also about, I'm thinking about the impact of these conversations on us in kind of circles and communities, and how there's something very isolated and very insular about when we hold our kind of story close to our chest.
Yeah.
We hold on the identity of being a victim or being a perpetrator, and we just hold it. It keeps us isolated.
Yeah.
And something about when we kind of open it all up and say, we have all done things, we are all carrying intergenerational trauma, legacies in different ways, and we are all kind of struggling in a culture that doesn't really hold space for it or help us through it. We don't have, it's so hard to get kind of processes of like, transformative justice, restorative justice, all the kind of mediation processes, conflict resolution, like they're not part of our mainstream society. It's like we have judicial systems where it's like you have some kind of issue, and then you get so polarized and separated, and kind of the whole system creates more of a division and more of a story that you hold close to your chest. And you just the two sides just create completely different stories and say that the other one is at fault. It's just so far away from a nuanced discussion of like, and also me too, and me too, and me too. I've also done these things, and me too.
Yeah.
And like opening the whole thing up, like just bringing down the walls. We talk about the hawthorn hedges in the month of June, and how these divisions get erected, and how we just need to like rewild them and make them places of beauty, and bring down those divisions by finding ways of saying, actually, we're not so different, but we need structures to support us. And I think we need each other, because as we start to have these, we were talking before about these kind of brave conversations, and as we start to have them, whether it's just with ourselves, like writing a list of the things that we've done and starting to open up to that, or starting to think about the things that other people have done and starting to bring forgiveness there. When we do those things, they're not easy because we're without support structures in our communities for that, without elders that can, lead us through. I mean, I wish we all had a Mick Collins like in our living rooms to kind of help us, but because we don't have that, we have each other at least, and we can say, we can bring to our sharing circle, we can bring to our discussions the stories of what we've tried, and if they went wrong and someone did thorn us in the chest and say, no, go away, I don't want to hear from you, I'll never forgive you. Or whether when we try and forgive ourselves, we find that we can't, bring those stories and share them with each other with that kind of humility and openness, because it will help other people to open up, and we'll all be able to do this together. It's like a joint effort, I think. You can't do it. I think
it is. It is the big collective agreement that none of us are perfect, and we've all done things, and some of us have done things that are worse than others. I've probably done things worse to people than you have. Who knows? We'll have that conversation later. But I mean, should I say my public declaration has done that? Yeah, but who knows what secrets you have, Ros? We all have them. But the thing is, I think it is that. And do you know what? You've reminded me, and I think I put it in the book, this work should never be done under the guise or under the watch of the critic, because it'll get hold of that and just make you feel worse about yourself. It's got to be done under the guise of like, I'm doing this for my wholeness and for the wholeness of our species, because all of us are trapped in this transgenerational inheritance of the wound and the wounder and all that thing. And yes, there's something about bringing it back and saying, let me start afresh, but without beating myself up, and sit with the discomfort of that, but with a point that I've not lost sight of the fact that I'm more than that story. I'm more than that activity that I got involved with. I'm much more than that. You know, we're holy beings. The holy has just got eradicated out of our life in some weird way. We're not allowed to talk about it in certain Western cultures. Oh, that's just for the religious people. No, we're all part of a holy. You know, the earth is this magnificent sort of beautiful sphere of holiness. You know, everything is numinous. And so I just think that there's something about knowing that there's more to us than just that bad bit, and don't jump on the bad bit. I had a dream once when I was in Switzerland. I went to see Jung's grave, saw his tower, and I got invited into the tower by his grandson. It was a great stroke of luck. I think that's in the book. It's in one of the books. And I went I went back to my apartment in Zurich that night, and I had a dream after having been around my heroes' grave and buildings and all that. And then I went back and had a dream of two people gossiping about me, saying, oh, that's Mick Collins. He's a bad man. And I woke up. I felt awful, because I know the truth of that badness for sure. I've got the record, you know. But what I did was I set up a chair, an empty chair, and put Jung in it. And I had a therapy session with Jung in Zurich. And I just went, I am bad because I've got this criminal record, and I've done things that I wasn't caught for, and I'm really sorry about that. And it's making, and the dream figures are accusing me of bad. And what Jung said, the wisdom of the unconscious, of course, he said, because I just dreamed into it. I imagined him speaking. I didn't occupy the chair in the role, like I didn't gestalt it like that, but I just imagined what he'd say. He said, the only criminal here is you willing to forfeit your wholeness for that narrative. And I went, wow. And he said, that's a crime, giving up on your wholeness just because of that. And that's that. So in a way, it kind of amplified the criminal element that I was identified with as being bad. And he said, no, the only real crime is that you're forfeiting your own wholeness.
Yes.
Drop it. And that was a real bang, you know. So I kind of then went off and I thought, wow, I've just had a therapy session with Jung in Zurich.
Amazing. And I love that your own unconscious managed to create that amazing pearl of wisdom as well. Like
I had to.
Yeah.
I woke up in a right horrible state. All of that I've just spoken about, the list, was permeated in the dream element of he's bad. So all it told me was there's a bit more work to do, Mick. You're not there yet just because you visited Jung's tower and met his grandson, had a nice chat. There's more work to do.
Well, that's inspiring for all of us, that there's always more work, you know, even with your incredible process with it, there's still always bits of work to do.
Definitely. And I feel that in a way that's just part of the course. And you know, we may not be done, but we're doing the best preparation for ourselves for when we get to the end of our life, and whatever we think happens after that. The near-death research shows a consistent pattern, that there's a sort of an encounter of a life review, and you kind of feel what you kind of impact, how you impacted others. Well, if you've already got a head start on that, you'll have a much better time in that bardo.
Absolutely. And also if we can really fully engage with, drop the story and like, well, I'm a victim, you did this, and actually really think about the times that we have impacted on others. It gives us time to change it and do things differently. So that when we get to that life review, you know, yes, we've had a kind of, you know, that there was a pattern, there was a burden, but we've been able to not only atone for it and acknowledge it, but we've also been able to try and do things a bit differently, even just a little bit differently. That's the work, isn't it?
I think it is. And, you know, I know a lot of people talk about soul contracts. I don't remember writing one. I don't know if I've got one, but I trust the fact that there's something about that which might feel correct, that somehow you've come into this life to do something and to clean something up and to become a better whole human being, and to be connected to the divine, the holy, the sacrament of living, the joy and all that. But yeah, we got to go through the messy stuff, and maybe that will be a lifetime's work. It's certainly been for me since the spiritual crisis in 86, which brought it all to a head. I mean, I've just been slowly doing the work, and it comes up again at times, and but it's okay. I feel it's just like, if you leave this life and you think, what, I did do some rotten things, but actually I got a lot out of that, and I've done a lot of good from that as well, because let's not forget that there's and as you were speaking, I always get little pop-ups when you're talking about the hedge. I love the hedge, and I know it's quite particular to this country, to the British Isles. Not everyone has hedges, but one thing I think is really lovely, I've done it myself when I've done conservation work, is you get a hedge growing, and then at the bottom it keeps all the soil in, it stops soil erosion. So the hedge is really good for maintaining a good ecosystem. What's interesting, you get a bill hook, and you find these uprights, and you have to trim them down and lay them, and so the new growth, and then you trim all the top, and the new growth can come through. It strengthens the base. So they're called pleachers. So the pleachers, or if you ever go past a hedgerow and you see all these uprights that have been dropped like that, and they're all at angles with new growth coming through, that's a hedgerow that's been maintained.
Oh, I haven't seen one of those. I'll look out for it.
It's a really good skill to have. Yeah.
They're good for the ecosystem for soil erosion.
Yeah. So the hedge then, because the pleachers are then laid down, the growth is thick at the bottom. So if there's a windy day, the topsoil won't blow off through the hedge. It'll stop that. Whereas if it just grows up, it can get leggy. All sorts of stuff can leak across that boundary. So it's a really lovely way of, it's a lovely metaphor for continually doing the work. I need to put a few pleachers down.
Yes, completely.
Yeah.
And if, I mean, we should stop, because we're just, otherwise we're just going to talk all day. But another thing, maybe a future conversation, is around kind of, we touched on it in our chat earlier, around, people talk a lot about putting up boundaries and thinking about the hedges and boundaries. And often I think we have a kind of story around like, oh, I'm not going to engage with this particular person because I've got boundaries up now. And I'm just like, no, I have a boundary. I'm putting my boundaries down. And I think there is a real difference between kind of healthy boundaries when we take care of ourselves, but as you say, you leave a door open.
Yeah.
So for hearing, so you can't see over the top of a big hedge. You can't see what's on the other side.
Yeah.
You make a story about it. There's a big divider, and you imagine and you project, and both sides project onto the other. If you feel that you're putting boundaries up and it's a big old hedge so that you have like no contact with somebody, then obviously in certain circumstances you might want to keep that. That might be important, but keeping this idea of like having a little doorway in that big high hedge, so that in your boundary that's like, no, I'm not going to let myself be hurt. It's like, keep a door open so that even if you don't have communication, you can still see them. You can still open your eyes to the reality of what's on the other side, the full person, the whole person, with their dark side and their light side, and the bad they did and the good they did, and the fact that they might have done something terrible to you, but they might have done something really wonderful for other people, and they might be doing something really good today. So it's like keeping that little chink in the hedge, so that you can see them, maybe even communicate, and just so that our boundaries don't become dividing lines where we refuse to let our stories be softened and make our stories into kind of legends that just perpetuate division and polarization.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I love it. And I totally agree with you 100%. I mean, we had that preamble before we chatted, and we were on the same page, weren't we? Yeah, and just to really allow some permeability, some way. As you were speaking, I was imagining the hedge going there and the hedge coming here, but then there's just a little offshoot there, so that there's a way in and out of that hedge, but it still does what it's meant to do, a little overlap and a little path. So a little, that was the image I got. But
And to do that, we have to feel strong and held and safe to be able to allow a chink. And that's what we need to do for ourselves and in our communities, to find that safety so that we can have the ways in, the open doors.
And to extend the metaphor just one little bit, the more you lay the pleaches down and strengthen the base, and then the beautiful flowering of that hawthorn, all the eco activity that takes place in it, because it's a brilliant system, and so it actually maintains something health, and there's no need to then go out and look for others to feel like revengeful towards or whatever. You're building your healthy ecosystem, and it is bringing vitality to it. You're laying the conditions, and more's coming to it, and who knows how that'll impact the other. They might just feel like, oh God, yeah, I wish I had a bit of that, and then reach out. You never know, do you? But yeah, it's a nice metaphor. I'm really glad we've done hawthorn.
Yes. Oh, well, maybe next time we come around to hawthorn again next year, maybe we can have another chat again.
We'll do a hawthorn. Yeah, lovely. I take it every day. I have hawthorn drops every day.
Yes, for the heart, for the heart, for blood pressure.
For the heart, yeah. Well, you know, sort of getting on it a little bit now. You know, you sort of like just think, yeah, I can sort of, because as you get older, your blood pressure just drifts up anyway. So I think put a bit in. So thank you. I appreciate it. I feel like we've had hawthorn medicine.
Yeah, me too. Mick, thank you so much. It's been so lovely having you. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Ros. No, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you.
Me too. And we'll put links to your work and your website, your website, transformational.co.uk. I love that title.
Yeah.
We'll put all the links in the platform so people can find you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. Have a lovely day.
And you too. Bye. Bye.